Welcome to the Software Without Borders podcast. I'm your co-host, Jarrett Striner. Along with me is Andy Hilliard, Accelerance CEO. Our guest today is Olivier Poulard, Managing Director of Global Software Engineering Strategies at Accelerance. And today, we're going to talk about success strategies in software outsourcing.
So Olivier, we've known each other for a few years. In fact, you were a client of ours a few years back. Can you give me a little bit of your background and experiences in the software outsourcing world?
Well, I've been outsourcing since 1997, so early on, I would say, in that world. My first project was very small back in India, and the team was about 7, 8 people, I believe, and the project was no more than 6 months, but extremely successful because from the first day, I understood that including the outsourcing team as my own team was extremely important. And that's what I've been doing since then.
How has the outsourcing industry changed over the last 20 to 30 years? Quite a bit with technology, of course, but as far as geographies and the kind
So
of
we have a lot more to choose from, obviously. Initially, it was mainly from India and China. Now we have offshore partners all over the world in all the continents, maybe except in Antarctica. Penguins have not taken on this job yet, but it might come one day. So that's that. From a technology standpoint, of course, the fact that now we can have video calls, reliable video calls, we can definitely work together. It's a lot easier to work together remotely.
You struck a point when you said there were fewer options, fewer countries providing services, and fewer service providers. I think today there are 30, 40,000 service providers, small, medium, and large, and in many different countries. And I do remember I've been in the outsourcing world since 1995 myself, started with Cognizant, but back in those days it was a few large service providers serving primarily large clients, Fortune 1000 clients, and a lot of the focus was around certifications like CMMI Level 5. How has that whole landscape changed?
Well, now we have a lot more to choose from multiple perspectives, small to extremely large companies that will cater for different types of projects, different types of programs, but also from a technology standpoint, some of the offshore partners are a little bit more specialized in some technologies or industries, in fact, than others. So we have a large selection today that we didn't have about 20 years ago. It's a good thing and it's a bad thing at the same time. Good thing because, of course, we have options. The bad thing is that there are too many options, and sometimes it's not, well, most of the time, in fact, it's not really easy to find the right option for your own needs.
So let's get back to you specifically. You've worked across various industries in building globally distributed teams and also different client sizes. So how has that dynamic evolved over the years and the differences between one versus another?
So I started with very small projects that I outsourced, as I said, at first in India, and then much, much bigger projects. So my smallest project was about 6, 7 people, and the largest 800 people in multiple locations for a single program. The dynamic for those large programs is extremely different from the dynamic for very small programs or projects.
Can you describe a little bit of the operational complexity with large projects versus most recently when we were interacting, you were working with a much smaller Latin partner versus a huge, say, Indian partner?
That's right. So making sure that everybody is aligned on that program is a lot more difficult with a large program than it is with a small program. Now, the complexity compounds on when you have multiple partners. So this large program that I was referring to earlier involved three different partners in one, two, three different countries, in fact.
Hmm.
So at the time, it was two in India, one in Ukraine, and two in Russia. That was some time ago. But that worked very, very well because we managed to get all three partners aligned and we got them to collaborate, in fact. So that was a big winner for us.
So the topic today is around successes and challenges in offshore outsourcing. Can you provide me some maybe data points or facts or figures around the status of outsourcing software development today? Are the numbers good? Are the numbers poor? There's obviously more maturity in the marketplace over decades, but what does it sort of look like?
Well, surprisingly, so I think I think I think it's good and it's bad. It's good because the outsourcing world has matured quite a bit, and it's a lot more reliable today than it used to be, for one thing.
Hmm.
However, software engineering has not, in my mind, evolved the right way. In fact, a lot of technology projects end up in partial or total failure, regardless of whether they are outsourced or not, by the way. So
Hmm.
we need to take that into account as well. It's not just about outsourcing your software, it's about how you engineer your software, how you define your software first, in fact, and how you deliver your software.
So I read an interesting fact that I think more than 50% of software development is done in the United States, but the United States only has, is it 15% of the world's software developers, sort of a supply and demand inequity?
That's true. I've done some research on this, and I found that about 50-60% of the project in the world are commissioned in the US, in fact. But only 16% of the software engineering capacity is in the US. So there's a big discrepancy between how many projects are actually commissioned in the US versus what we can do in the US. So outsourcing is not just about lowering your cost of development, but it's also finding the talent where it is. If It's always possible to scale a project or program in the US, but it's very lengthy and quite costly. And then again, it all depends on your time to market. If you
Hmm.
need quick access to talent, outsourcing is probably your only option at this point.
So it seems like most companies are bought into distributed teams and work,
Mhm.
and even taking that a step further, offshore talent, access to talent, especially if there's limited supply, but there's a large demand. So it seems like there's various tools out there in order to enable companies to engage in offshore outsourcing. Is there any guidelines or classes or ways in which Joe Blow can outsource effectively with relatively little experience, or is it just trial and error, which obviously sounds like a very painful pathway?
I would say it's like everything else. You need to call a professional. You need to call someone who's had a lot of experience with offshore to help you with your offshore programs, whether they are small or big. Uh, it doesn't matter in the end. It's like today you have a problem with your car and you want to repair it yourself. You don't do that every day. You might as well call a professional who will look at your car, the problem in your car, and then fix it for you.
Especially
For the
today, right? Because cars are much more complex than they
That's
ever
right.
were, right? So, and I would imagine people distributed around the world and trying to organize them
Yeah,
is sort of like a modern car, very complex.
that's right. So fuel injection, is a lot more complex and requires tools that you don't have at home anyway. So that's the same thing with offshoring. You don't necessarily have the methods. You don't necessarily have the tools. you don't have the experience, you are going to waste a lot of time trying to figure out through trial and error, try to figure out everything that needs to be done in today's world. And on top of this, technology is a lot more complex than it used to be. So what I was able to do on my own in 1997 and yourself in 95 has nothing to do with what we have to do today. And the reason is very simple. Again, technology is a lot more complex. The dynamic in the world is completely different. And even within the US, in fact. So call a professional, to help you with your outsourcing, especially on the ways of working and collaborating.
So let me imagine if I'm a CTO and historically I've always hired locally, and I guess historically most people would commute into the office. But today I have most of my team working remotely. And let's say I'm not offshoring. Let's say I'm just working remotely but locally, right? And so I will hire people through a due diligence effort. I will, interview them and maybe give them some tests and then hire them locally. What is the difference between that and my ability to then hire globally? Why do I need training or teaching, or what else do I need to know that's different than, because I'm not seeing a person, I'm not seeing a person. If I'm interacting on video, I'm interacting on video. What's really the difference
Yeah,
between
so
hiring
that's a
locally?
very, very good question. The main one of the main issue is differences in culture. So the way you perceive the world in one country, it might be extremely different from how you perceive the world in a different country. So that aspect of it is quite important. The fact that you have to relate to one another, the fact that uh, we've always had to put ourselves in the other's shoes, right? But here we're talking about significantly different shoes.
Hmm. So can you talk about some other challenges that are endemic to working with people in different cultures, and how might that differ if they're working in multiple different cultures versus maybe a single different culture, say India versus India, Vietnam, Colombia, and South Africa?
So we all have a different definition of everything pretty much based on culture. So the first thing first is to clearly state what we mean by, okay, are we ready to start? Or
Mm.
are we done with something? For the rest, how it actually is done, which can be very different. For instance, if you look at the way people engineer software in India versus Eastern Europe, for instance, I've seen significant differences. But in the end, the results can be the same or can be equivalent as long as we have a clear understanding of what needs to be done and when we can start and when we can declare what we've done.
Mm.
So, Olivier, how do you close that gap of when is done done? What is the best method for teams to get together and to discuss what does this mean? What is the process to have this done? Is this something where an on-site visit is important, or will a Slack channel or email work, or where would the disconnect fall in that type of situation?
I think that the best way is to have a starting point and have in place what I would call a continuous improvement plan. That is, that your definition of ready and your definition of done should evolve over time. And they should evolve over time because you're going to start, you know, working more and more with your partner, and you're going to discover it's not like culture cannot be discovered on day one or day two. It takes time to fine tune how you can collaborate, how you can communicate, etc. What works well for one country might not work well for another country. So often your definition of ready and your definition of done needs to be tuned to that culture as well. My take on this again is you have a starting point and you have in place a regular reviews and to make sure that that there is a clear understanding, and if there are misunderstandings, that they are actually discussed without bias and honestly, and for that definition of ready and that definition of done to be fixed.
So, if I can rewind this conversation just a little bit and ask a real generic question, outsourcing in many senses of the word in different industries and different scenarios is there's no culture needed. It's basically sending requirements to get done by someone who is a specialist or a company that's a specialist and provides better quality at a lower cost. What is the need? What is the importance of building culture as it relates to software outsourcing?
Well, we're dealing with people, so we need to make sure that the team we have a team, right? So since we're dealing with people, we need to relate to one another. We need to establish trust, and that trust, is established based on credibility, but also what I would call almost intimacy, if you will, where we need to understand each other so that each party can actually trust what we're saying and what we're doing. So trust is a very, very, very powerful item here in software engineering.
Okay. So, Olivier, you contributed a section to my book Synergia about effective outsourcing is about people, not contracts, motivating your teams by communicating what's really in it for them. What is the importance of doing that?
Well, people are people, and I think that, well, I know that motivation comes from understanding why you're doing something. So you want, in general, from your teams, you want to get commitment, not just compliance to something. Compliance is the easy way to get someone to do something, but it doesn't mean that it will be done as per your expectations and beyond your expectations, even better. So first thing first is to share what's most important to your business and operations and what's most important to you as the buyer or the user. Why is the expected outcome so important? How will the expected outcome improve performance from your perspective for your business, for your operations, for your end users, for your system? And what would potentially happen if the expected outcome did not happen? So you see, by explaining to your partner why things need to be done, why they're so important, why if that did not happen is important as well, will help them clearly understand your business priorities and will help them, motivate their troops essentially to deliver what you need on time, on budget, because if they do understand the importance of what you're doing, they will do everything they can to be on time. At the same time, you need to make sure that they understand what's in it for them. So, as an example, I'm just going to refer back to that large project. We kept telling the team that it's a one in a lifetime opportunity to deliver an entire airline system. Those airline systems are re-engineered every 30 to 40 years. Chances are that you're not going to have another chance to do it again. At the time, we were using cutting edge technologies as well. People were interested in doing new things, and we were also doing them in a new way. They went from waterfall to agile, and every half month we had software delivered, working software delivered every half month. So we had production grade software every half month, and every quarter we had production ready software.
Hmm.
That high frequency, helped also with their motivation. So they understood why it was important to do it, why it was important if we did not do it, so why it was important for our business, but also for the airlines. And they could see something for themselves because, oh, we're part of history, and in a sense. And on top of this, we have all this cool technology that is cutting edge. So why not?
So I'm going to ask this question in a slightly different way. Much of your answer might be the same or might be enhanced. But if you can compare and contrast a globally distributed software development team that is culturally aligned
Hmm.
and with the right skill set in the right role, and where individuals are intrinsically motivated, versus what I think is probably more common, which is just hiring the right resource with the right skill sets, putting that person in the right seat and asking him to do X, Y, and Z. What can you compare and contrast the benefits or the gaps or the risk or challenges involved with one scenario versus another? Because I think a lot of CTOs, they don't really think about intrinsic motivation or cultural alignment. They think about people with skills in seats at lower prices that can do X, Y, and Z.
Again, it's about compliance versus commitment. So if you
Mm,
want to get better productivity, you need to make sure that the people, whether they are part of the company or they are the staff of a partner, they are committed to what you're doing. So it's not about it's not just about technology. It's not just about the process you have in place. It's primarily about the people, as far as I'm concerned.
So, what are the things, say I'm a CTO and I want commitment, not compliance? What are the things I should be doing initially and along the way in this team building exercise to get the commitment that you talk about?
So find a partner that you can relate to, that you can collaborate with. Find a partner with whom you can communicate on a regular basis, like it were your own team. That's really what my recommendation is here. You want a good commitment, make sure that they understand it's a win-win situation, not just me, the CTO, hiring you because you're low cost and that's my win. It has to be a win-win. It has to be that I'm getting something as the CTO, and
Hmm,
as the CTO, not only will I get a lower cost, but I will get talent. I will get talent that I cannot get easily in the States. I will get velocity because now with the same budget, I can increase the size of my team.
hmm. What else should I be doing? Is video enough? It's video is pretty cool nowadays. Yeah, I feel like I'm almost in the same room with you. Is that adequate, or do I need to go above and beyond?
There are certain things that you can do face to face that you can't really do on video. So there are many, many, many cultures out there where sharing a meal is a lot more important than just exchanging words. You will learn a lot more about people uh, when during a meal, for instance, dinner especially, than you will learn at the office. I've seen this many, many times in India, for instance, Colombia, Brazil, China. I mean, it's absolutely amazing how people open up when they are more in a more relaxed environment, and then you can tell whether you can trust them or not. By the way.
True.
That's the intimacy that I was talking about earlier. So yes, you know that from a technology standpoint, from a process standpoint, they are CMMI 3, 4, 5, or they follow certain standards. They're credible. They're credible from a process standpoint. They're credible from a technology standpoint. You know that they have delivered products before, services, etc. Fine. But trust is not just about credibility, it's also about how you can relate to one another. And I found that people get a lot more committed if they feel part of your team.
Hmm.
So my advice again is to make sure that whomever you're going to deal with as an outsourcer or internal staff, that they can one trust you and relate to you.
Sure. So So many people talk about finding the right talent, but not as many companies, I believe, focus on the commitment or retention aspect. And I have to imagine that there's a lot of value gained or lost based on commitment slash retention over time. Because then you get in an endless loop of just trying to find the right new talent to replace the old talent that you valued and that knowledge transfer was affected and lost, right?
That's right. So I will give you an example on all the projects that I've done in India. While my coworkers, peers, and other groups that I knew of, we're talking about 20, 30% attrition rate. Mine was 7% and less.
And how did you
The big
accomplish that?
benefit of this is that you do not lose. Sorry?
How did you accomplish that? Tell me that story because that sounds critical.
Yeah, well, the benefit of having a low attrition rate uh, is that you will retain the experience, because you can always acquire people with experience with a certain technology, a certain process. The problem is that person does not necessarily know the business domain, and that makes a big difference. I've seen productivity gains over time as people knew more about the industry that they were serving,
Mm,
and not just the industry, but also the architecture that they were engineering against. So, how do you achieve a 7% attrition rate versus 20, 30% attrition rate? Again, it's all about making sure that people feel that they are part of something bigger than themselves, that they feel that they are going to make a difference. And most software engineers want to make a difference, quite frankly. That's why they are in engineering. Otherwise, they would be in a different business making a lot more money than they are making. They're extremely
mm,
smart people. But at the same time, they're people, and if they are motivated, if they find the motivation to do something, they will stay on board. Why would you go anywhere else when you know that you're well paid, of course, but you're making a you could potentially be making a big difference in this world. I think that's the type of people that you want in your team, by the way. So that's that's me giving. At the same time, I want to make sure that I select the leaders of the offshore team. And I found that I remember dealing with a team that I didn't build. So I inherited that team, and the attrition rate was awful, pretty high. And the results of the team was disastrous. Was not very good. I mean, it was okay. Let's put it this way. But in my world, it was disastrous. And just to find out that the main problem was not the 30 software engineers in India. They were all good people. The leader was awful with them.
mm.
Didn't know how to manage people, obviously, and was treating people like garbage, essentially. So from that day on, I made sure that I personally selected the management and the technical leadership of my teams, especially the larger teams. How do you do this? Again, Zoom or any other video call technology is not going to help. You've got to go on site. You've got to go on site and interview yourself, the various people who would want to be the technical leaders on your team.
Hmm. Can you describe a little bit about the concept of accountability? How you how you give accountability to leaders and how you expect those leaders to give accountability to people. What does that look like? A lot of people talk about accountability, but I think sometimes it doesn't get down to the individual and they don't really they can't define what accountability is and maybe their manager says, "Well, I don't like you or I don't think you're doing work and therefore, I'm going to switch you
Yeah.
or let you go," and the person is like, "Well, I didn't really know what I was accountable for." So what is the importance of that? And is it how do you effectively embed that in a culture?
So, first thing first is to remove what I would call emotions and biases. Um, People will become accountable if they know exactly what is expected of them. So it's not about being, fuzzy on that subject. Uh, I think there are two things that you need to do. One is to give them a framework that they can manage their team and deliver upon. That's one thing. And that framework means that there are a set of rules that they have to follow. Very, very simple. I would say I call them guiding principles. And I don't need to be involved for the decision making. So they actually make those decisions based on those guiding principles, and they know the guiding principles. And if they have any problems, they can always come back to me for uh, guidance, additional guidance. At the same time, they know that I'm here for them to manage the exceptions. So they manage 80% of the delivery, and I manage the other 20%. That's where I spend 80% of my time on exception handling, essentially. And they know that they can trust that I will be there no matter what. So that accountability is not unfair, if you will. That accountability will be the based on the guiding principles, based on the rules that we have set together that are clearly defined and understood. At the same time, that person knows that uh, we don't need to cut corners just to meet something because there are always exceptions as long as we can justify them and as long as they feel that or they know that they can count on me, the CTO, the buyer, to help them with dealing with those exceptions and making the right decisions.
Olivier, what is the biggest factor that it comes to when looking for software outsourcing? What do you need to bring to the table before you even choose a partner to deal with? What do you need to have together for your team to start even evolving to step out of your own company and look for a team to assist?
That's a very good question. In fact, what I would do to start with is to clean my own floor first before I go somewhere else. So if already you have issues internally to engineer software, you may want to clean that up first or make a decision that everything should be outsourced. But even if everything should be outsourced from a development standpoint, you still have to ensure that your product management, your project management capabilities are up to par or better. Without that, uh, you're going to go from one disaster to another, and that other disaster will make you feel that outsourcing doesn't work or distributed work doesn't work, which in fact is not true. Um, if you have everything in control or under control on your side, it's a lot easier to actually outsource.
Great, thank you. That was a perfect answer. Well, that was an episode of Software Without Borders. I'm Jarrett Schreiner, along with Andy Hilliard and Olivier Poulard. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you.